How can we support premature babies in the neonatal intensive care unit or NICU?
Why do we care so much about steady oxygen levels in babies?
How does occupational therapy and nursing come together for a project for babies?
Who is involved in the project and who does it ultimately impact?
Hello and welcome to Raincoat.
My name is Isabelle,
And I'm Sarah.
and we are excited to bring people like yourselves together to bridge the gap between current rehabilitation research and the general public.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Raincoat. Today we have Dr. Liisa Holsti and Dr. Manon Ranger joining us. So before we get started, to the two of you, why don't you tell us a little bit more about who you are and what kind of research you do?
Sure. Well, thanks very much for having us both here today. It's a real pleasure. My name is Liisa Holsti. I'm a pediatric occupational therapist. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy at UBC. And I do research primarily over at the Women's Hospital in the neonatal intensive care nursery. And what I'm interested in doing is making sure that babies who are critically ill and come through our nursery have the best possible developmental outcomes. And there are ways that we can work on their environment and their health to make sure that that happens.
Okay, well, thank you also to both of you for having us. This is a great opportunity to share our research and knowledge about this important topic. And so my name is Manon Ranger, and I'm an assistant professor in the School of Nursing at UBC. And I'm also a nurse by profession, a pediatric nurse. And I also am an investigator at the BC Children's Hospital Research Institute, where I conduct research, translational research, so meaning that I do animal research and I also do clinical research. And the animal research is really to answer some questions that cannot be answered doing clinical research. And the population that I'm really interested in is complementary to Lisa's. It's also looking at preterm babies, so babies that are born 2 to 4 months too early and that spend a lot of time in the neonatal intensive care unit. And I'm particularly interested in brain development and really protecting the brain of these babies because they're exposed to a lot of stress and some painful procedures. And this is really the focus of my research, preventing any adverse effects on their brain development.
Thank you so much for introducing. So, what we're going to talk about today is a project you both collaborated on, and it's called CALMER, that project. And since we first heard about it, it really stuck in our minds. Why don't you, Liisa, give us a little pitch about this wonderful project?
Sure. Well, this project arose because one of the problems that Manon and I are concerned about in the nursery, as she mentioned, is that these babies have to experience a number of procedures that are necessary for them to survive, but that also cause pain. And this kind of pain changes the brain while the babies are in the nursery, and there are long-term effects on their neurodevelopment and other areas of their function. And one of the really powerful ways of helping the babies feel less pain is to have a parent hold the baby skin to skin, usually on the mother's chest or the father's chest. And that really reduces pain and stress, and it does a lot of other positive things for baby development. The problem is that sometimes parents can't be available when the medical procedures have to happen, and that it's for a variety of reasons. In British Columbia, they may live very far away. Procedures happen 24 hours a day. The parents may need to be at home with their other children. that there are lots of reasons why they may not be present at the bedside all the time. And I happened to be visiting a lab with a professor in computing science, Dr. Karen McLean, about 10 years ago, and noticed a little creature, a robotic creature in her lab. And the creature itself was a replica of an animal, and it purred, and it had a breathing motion and a heartbeat sound. And I looked at it and I thought, wow, wouldn't it be interesting if we could make something like that for the nursery for when parents aren't available to do skin-to-skin holding? And that one afternoon set a course in my life for the next 10 years working on the CALMER project, developing, we're now on the third prototype and have tested it in the nursery. But it was one of those serendipitous gatherings between two researchers at UBC who came from very different areas to start the conversation about how we could help the babies in the nursery.
I think that really highlights the importance of interdisciplinary networking and just getting to know people outside of your own department. So that's really great. And having that aha moment, I don't think comes very often. So that's, again, really cool to hear. That was what kind of sparked the interest and carried this project forward. I guess one question that I had is, you mentioned that you had to go through multiple iterations and you're onto your third protocol now. So can you tell me a little bit more about what each step kind of consisted of and who you had to work with? Were there any other people you brought onto the team? Kind of who are these stakeholders of this project?
So I'm going to backtrack just a second, tell you why we named it CALMER, and then I'll explain the cast of many who've been along to help with creating the project. The creature that we saw in Dr. McLean's lab was called Tamer because you could pet it and it would respond. It had a robotic response. And I was trying to think of what the positive thing was that we were going to be doing with this new device. And the whole point of it is to calm stress. And so that's how the name came about. The first prototype, I worked with Dr. McLean and a team of undergraduate senior engineering students. They had a year-long project, which ended in a capstone project. And so they actually built the first device, and they built it so it was sturdy enough that we could actually run a clinical pilot trial with the first device on 10 babies. And so we did that in the nursery, and we seemed to get some positive results, reducing babies' heart rate stress or heart variability stress. And that gave us enough of a clue that really we might be onto something. And so the next version, I worked with the research engineering group at BCIT, fantastic group who we've had continued involvement with. They built a much more upscale model, and we were able to use that single prototype in a randomized clinical trial that was funded by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. And we studied 49 babies, and Manons was part of that second larger trial. And in that project, we measured a number of different indicators that help us understand how babies react to a blood collection, a blood test that they need. And we found that CALMER works no differently from a human touch interaction that is standard in our nursery. And then the third prototype was also built by the engineering group at BCIT. We needed a version that would be much more durable that we will be using in a project that we hope to get funded over the next year. The other people who have been involved have been the Technology Development Office at the BC Cancer Agency. Our key link with that is Dr. Patrick Rebstein, and they hold 2 patents we now have on the device and have been fantastic support along the way. But and I've had tons of support from all the staff in the NICU. And so really, it's been one of those projects when I have needed help and I've asked for it, people have showed up. And so it's just been a real a really fun thing to do, even though, not every day is wonderful, but it's been on the whole super positive.
Wow, that sounds like a real journey. You just mentioned that Manon came in around the second phase of that project. And I'm wondering, Manon, can you tell us a little bit more about how you heard of CALMER?
Well, that's a great question. I guess I will first backtrack also about a bit about my background. So in my PhD project, I was really interested in measuring pain, but with a more objective, and I use quotations because babies cannot tell you verbally that they're in pain and how much their what is their pain level, which is the gold standard for people that can rate their pains like us. And so I we usually rely on behaviors mostly, or physiological measures like increase in heart rate, or the level of oxygenation in the blood, respiration rate, but mostly behavior responses, especially facial expression. I used a technology called near infrared spectroscopy, which measures uh, oxygenation levels in tissue. Especially, we can use it for brain tissue. And so the idea was that um, when there's pain, there's a lot of blood that goes to the brain, and it can bring a lot of oxygen, or there could be a drop also in oxygen in the brain. And so if we could use this a device that measures by infrared spectroscopy, or NIRS, um, then we could have kind of like this more objective measure of pain. And so in my PhD, that's what I did during a painful procedure in the cardiac intensive care unit. So the procedure was removal of a chest drain. It's quite painful, but it's short lived. And I wanted to use this technology to see if I could have like a signal, pick up a signal that would indicate pain. And also at the same time, we were filming babies and looking at their facial expression, and so I could see a correlation between the facial expression and also what was going on in their brain. My PhD was conducted at McGill University in Montreal, and then I was coming to UBC to do a postdoc. And Lisa connected with me nearly I think I wasn't even coming, and she already connected with me because we have known each other from conferences because of our interest in pain management in children, and especially in neonates and in little babies. And so when I came, she talked to me about this project and about using NIRS to measure pain during the blood collection, and to compare the level of oxygenation in the brain of babies that were not on CALMER compared to babies that were, in combination also with behavior measures, facial expression to measure pain, and also the heart rate that was measured at the same time. And so that's what my role was. And now we have this great collaboration moving forward with CALMER, with the third prototype, trying to answer more questions regarding the CALMER's effect on babies' brain development, especially.
Great. I think you covered so beautifully how your clinical background really shaped how you got into the project and your interest in pain management and working specifically with that pediatric neonatal population. But to kind of flip it, Lisa, you mentioned you have an OT background. And for me, when I think about OT, I think about kind of that rehabilitation process, maybe from like a stroke or a spinal cord injury, kind of a different population and not babies. So, can you tell me a little bit more about how you made that connection between your OT background and working with the neonatal population?
Sure, thanks. Great question. So OTs are in working with tiny children, young babies. We are interested in how those babies interact with their environment, how they communicate with their families, and that may be through movements and behaviors and facial expressions and crying and smiling and things like that. How the parents respond, how they interact with other parts of their environment, and what their developmental trajectories are like. So when I was a clinician, I worked in the neonatal intensive care nursery, helping families understand the development of their babies and how they could interact to help their development be optimized. And then I also worked in a neonatal follow-up program that is still running, where we followed the highest risk babies up until 8 years of age. And so I saw how these babies actually did after they left the nursery and how they got along in their families. And a certain proportion of those very high risk babies, those born 800 grams or less, so less than a kilo, and or babies who had brain injury because of various conditions in the nursery. Some of those infants went on to have permanent impairments related to their neurodevelopment. And after 17 years, I was really interested in moving out of the clinical realm and seeing if I could apply research in a broader capacity to help more babies than just working with families on a one-on-one basis. And so my interest is really, how can we optimize brain development? How can we optimize the environment of these babies? And so CALMER actually changes the environment for these infants when they're in the incubator. It provides a specific stimulus, a heartbeat sound, a breathing motion, and an artificial skin surface to mimic aspects of the skin-to-skin care experience. And it's definitely not a complete replacement. It's a partial replacement. But a lot of research went into figuring out what components we thought would be most important to include. And then what I want to know is, my ultimate goal in the long term is what's going to happen to these babies' development if they have exposure to CALMER over an entire length of time when they're in the NICU, so over many months. And so far we have studied the impact of CALMER on a single blood collection and a CALMER stimulus up to about 6 hours afterwards. And the next phase of our research, we're going to look at babies having CALMER available over a number of weeks instead of just a half a day. And as Manon has mentioned, one of the key measures that we're going to be looking at is how that's going to affect brain development while the babies are still in the nursery.
Thank you, Liisa. Before we go further in the design process I'm really interested in, I just want to ask about if you can, as an OT, give for our listeners a quick definition of what is OT, what is an occupational therapist doing in general?
Sure. Well, if you go on the Canadian Occupational Therapy Association website, it says that we're healthcare workers who try to solve problems that interfere with a person's ability to do things that are important to them. And we divide those up into kind of 3 categories. So they're everyday things like, how can a person take care of themselves? Sarah, you mentioned the issue around a stroke. And so how can we help people get dressed after they've had some brain injury related to stroke? That might be one example. Another example is, how do they manage their productive lives? So things like their working environment, their ability to attend to school, participating in the community. And then we also are interested in how people spend their leisure time. So are they interested in gardening? How can we adapt the environment so that if there's injury or acute illnesses, how can they still participate in those activities? We take a client-centered approach. So we work specifically with the clients. And in my case, that would be the parents or the caregivers of each infant. or it may be the nursing staff or other nursery staff to try to optimize the environment for the babies. And then we may see them later on after they've left the nursery. So occupational therapists might be involved with premature children in the school system who might have various issues related to their motor development or their learning.
Great, thank you. I think that gives a good overview for our listeners of what occupational therapists do. And I totally agree with Sarah. It's very amazing that this work is also done with babies, something not everyone is thinking of directly. You mentioned that occupational therapy is very client-centered. So how does this client-centeredness work with CALMER?
Great question. One of the groups of people that I didn't mention when you were asking about what we did with the various iterations of the prototypes was that we not only did we do a clinical study around the effect on pain, but we also did we included end users in qualitative research, and that was led by Dr. Melinda Suto, who is an emeritus professor in my department. And she interviewed mothers and unit staff, so nurses primarily, but we also had a lab technician, about their thoughts around CALMER. We were particularly concerned that we didn't want mothers to feel that they were being replaced by a piece of equipment. And because it's already a vulnerable time for families where they have expert care of their infants, and trying to have the parents fit into that care and be the kind of primary person they need to be when the baby's in the nursery. And so from the qualitative interviews, we learned that, in particular, that the mothers, rather than feeling threatened or concerned about CALMER, felt that CALMER was an extension of themselves, and it made them feel less anxious to leave the baby, because CALMER can be programmed individually for each baby. So we take the resting heart rate and breathing rate of the parent, and that rate is programmed into CALMER for that particular baby and the parent. So it's a matching up. It's not just a generic number that we choose. And because we had that individualization, the families and the mums felt very relaxed. They weren't threatened by it. It looked very innocuous. When we designed it, we had input from the nursery staff, and I had worked in the nursery for many, many years, and so had a really good sense of what I thought would be acceptable in terms of a design for the nursery. And we made an absolute we made a critical point, which was, don't make it look like a human being. Make it look like a part of the incubator. And so we really deconstructed the design from something that started out with an animal-like appearance, which the tamer had originally, and we turned it into what looks like just part of the bed. And that's a quote from one of the mums. It just looks like another piece of the bed. And the staff felt that it didn't interfere with the workflow. And so we have some end user information about the second prototype. We need to do much more of that kind of gathering that much more information on the next iteration, which we will do, because the CALMER will be implemented over a longer period of time, and we need to understand in much more detail what effect that's going to have on the care of the babies.
You answered all the questions that I had. I was just going to ask you what it looked like, and you already went for it. I think the part that you highlighted about getting information from both the mums and the families that were directly affected by the CALMER project, but also kind of the staff, to make sure that the implementation part of the CALMER project would also be good to go. I think you kind of covered multiple bases there, which is always good. But there was one thing that I wanted to direct the conversation to, which was about a recent press release by UBC just from March 25th. And this was featuring both of you, Manon and Liisa. And I was wondering kind of what that was like to kind of share that with the external general public, and kind of if you had to change the way you shared the news in any way, or kind of what that was like.
Well, I can speak to that because basically I was the one that pushed this because it featured a paper that I was first author on, and Lisa was the senior author because it came out of her lab, her work, of course, and it was regarding my involvement with the Calmer project. The original randomized control trial. And in this paper, the findings were particularly focused on the NEARS, so the brain oxygenation findings regarding the effect of Calmer on that. A media person in the applied sciences really helped us pitch this, create this kind of media release that was in lay language. Um, and then it was posted on the UBC website, and then it got also pitched to different media outlets. And actually, there was some covering also at the CTV News, the local one, the Vancouver CTV News, on Saturday night at 6 o'clock, where they talked about Calmer and related to that media press release. Again, as Lisa mentioned, she said that Calmer was as effective as the standard care, which is a human touch based intervention for pain management. It was equivalent to, or as effective to calm the babies when we compared the two groups. And for the brain measures, so we found that the babies that were placed on Calmer during the painful procedure, it kept their brain oxygen levels steady during the procedure, and which normally often we see big spikes, either it goes up or comes down during in response to pain. And so what we saw again is that Calmer helped keep that steady. And why is that important is that for newborns, and especially for preterm babies, it's really critical to keep their overall brain blood oxygenation levels steady in their brain, because they're really at risk for brain bleeds.
Absolutely. And I think we've definitely talked a lot about the gap that Calmer is filling and the importance of it. And going back to the news release, why did you feel like you needed to publish or share the news about the results of your paper? Like, what's the importance of sharing the news with the general public using lay terms and making it accessible?
Well, because of the impact that Calmer may have on protecting the brains of these preterm babies, and also, well, that's it, to just share the news, because often we publish these findings, and then, well, we hope that people will read, but media is very good at really disseminating, and especially disseminating to the public that may have had parents that have had babies that were born prematurely, that spend a lot of time in the nursery. They would be interested in knowing that, yes, UBC is trying to help these babies grow healthy, grow up healthy, and we're trying to protect their brains. And Calmer has this potential to be able to do this. And so it was just to showcase great work that we're doing with Calmer.
If you don't mind, I can add just a couple of sentences to that. There are a couple of audiences who are really important for our ability to do what we call technology transfer. So um, the team and I developed Commerce so that one day we hope that the features will actually be embedded in incubators that are produced by the main manufacturers of incubators. And we'd also be interested in working with industry to produce single units. And there are a number of uses that those could be distributed for. And so not only do we have an audience of the general public and parents, as Manon said, and the staff in the nursery and other researchers around the world, but also very interested in working with industry to help us with the technology transfer, both in incubator platforms, but also as individual units.
Yeah, those are really important stakeholders and points, and really emphasizes how important this research is. You just mentioned around the world, you also have collaborations. So I'm wondering, what collaborations do you have around the world?
I'm working with an undergraduate, a set of undergraduate students from Cornell University. They're engineering students. And we're working on redesigning CALMER so that it can be used in developing countries. And so we have to really rethink how we power the device, what can be managed with the kind of cleaning abilities that they have in the nursery, where we have connections with a nursery in Malawi. And so we're kind of in the middle of that redesign. We don't have a prototype yet, but I'm hoping in the next couple of months that we will have the full design set so that we can take it to the next stage and actually build it. One of the things that's been interesting about learning about technology transfer is that we actually had to keep the project pretty quiet for quite a long time, because in order to secure the intellectual property or patents, you aren't allowed to disclose what you're doing. And so really we had to stay very quiet, and the research needed to take place locally. And that kind of helps keep the word under wraps until it can be publicized a little bit more. And so when we had the first trial results come out, it was really the first time I was able to talk about CALMER broadly through the media, and kind of had a whirlwind day with a bunch of interviews, and it was pretty exciting.
Okay, yeah, that must have been quite difficult to stay quiet about an exciting project like this. What I was wondering is, you just said already you have a few prototypes out, and where you're at right now. But how is that? How is someone able to maybe be part of this project? So, do you also invite parents to try it out with their newborns?
We're not at that stage yet. We had 5 prototypes that were built, and literally we just got delivery of those about 2 months ago from BCIT. Those were funded through generous donations through the BC Women's Hospital Foundation. And those are going to be used for the next randomized trial that we're going to apply for money for. We're doing some pilot testing right now. So the CALMER's not available commercially yet. But again, I'm interested and would welcome if there are any industry partners out there listening to this podcast who would like to talk further about how we might make this available more broadly for the public. I'm absolutely open to having those discussions. And in the meantime, we have enough just to start doing another larger project at BC Women's Hospital, hopefully starting up the bigger project within the next year. But as I said, we're already in the middle of starting a small pilot study. So as I said, it's not available yet commercially, but happy to talk to anybody interested in pursuing that with us. And we will be certainly involving families who are in the nursery to provide us with much more detailed feedback about their views about CALMER and how it's fitting into neonatal care more generally.
And we talked about some different ways of sharing the news of all the exciting updates of the CALMER project through either the news release, through papers that's been published. Are there any other mediums that the CALMER project has been talked about or shared that we haven't talked about yet?
I presented CALMER at the BC Tech Conference, which is a big international conference that's held in the spring. I was nominated through the Faculty of Medicine to present CALMER there. That was in 2018. Of course, it's been tweeted about on Twitter. Both the media release that Manon was involved in over the weekend, that was on Twitter. The papers and the media interviews I did in 2019, again, Twitter, lots of media sort of did reboots of the article in different venues. And so it came out in a number of different places, internationally and nationally. Those are the main things that I'm aware of at this point.
And if I may add, there was last year also the conference that is all new to me, and I believe also new to Liisa, but she's getting more involved in that. Is more like about designing for people. Um, and it was a conference that is mostly engineering and computer science people that attend, but there was a paper that was it's a yeah, it's a conference paper, conference proceeding. So this is was new to me also, getting involved in that, because normally we just publish our articles in peer reviewed journals, but this one was a bit different, the process, and it was focusing on the qualitative um, um, results that Liisa mentioned regarding the feedback that we got from the mothers, and also from the NICU staff, from the neonatal intensive care unit. And maybe Liisa, you can speak more about that process and what came out of it.
Yeah, thanks, Manon. Yeah, we worked with Dr. Sabrina Hauser, who at the time was a postdoctoral fellow in a program called the Designing for People Research Excellence Cluster, and I'm the co-director of that cluster. And it's an interdisciplinary cluster that's interested in human-centered design. And so Sabrina really took the reins of the qualitative research and prepared a proceedings for the Computer Human Interaction Conference, which is the largest international human computing interaction conference in the world. And so we had, and the purpose of the paper was really to talk about the 10-year design process. So not only did it present the qualitative data, but the qualitative data was embedded in the story of how CALMER came to be, how it fits in the current human-computer interaction technology development around touch-based design and that kind of thing for babies. And the paper was extremely well received and actually was given a Best Paper Award, which means it was in the top 1% of all the papers in its particular stream. And so that was really exciting. And as Manon said, it was a new experience. We publish papers slightly differently in health sciences. So it was fun to learn a new system with the engineering and computing science lens on things.
I do have one more question regarding that, because you said you did the qualitative study and we spoke about client-centeredness. And since babies cannot talk themselves and parents seem to play a really big role, can you give us a little bit of insight about what feedback did parents give?
Sure. Well, there were really sort of three themes that came out of the qualitative research. And I've mentioned one of those already, and it related to their feelings about how the device made them feel about parenting. So as I said, we didn't want to be a threat. So it was really about kind of what the mother's reactions were to CALMER. And the first theme was called a backup of me. And I've talked about that a little bit, but the fact that we could do something that would mimic the mother, and it provided kind of a positive link to the mother's biological signals was something that they really liked. And the second one was around strengthening the mother-infant connection. And lots of times the neonatal intensive care nursery can kind of seem like a scary place, and the environment can really feel unnatural. But the mothers really felt that The babies looked very comfortable on CALMER, that their heart rates were really nice and even, and it helped them the mothers themselves stay calm and kind of helped them handle the whole situation. And then the last theme was really about what did this piece of technology look like? What was the perception of it? And the mother's feedback was really around the CALMER being just a bed. So it was really seen as unobtrusive, an unobtrusive piece of technology. It was just like a platform. It wasn't scary. They didn't have any apprehensive thoughts. And so that was very gratifying. And one of the mothers said, "I'm happy that she's on it." And that really sort of underscored the whole idea. It was that we had lots of positive feedback, and that the CALMER was unobtrusive and unrobotic-like, which was really the goal we wanted in the design process.
And if I may add, being a nurse and having worked in the neonatal intensive care unit as when I first started as a nurse, I know that parents feel guilty if they can't be there 24 hours a day next to their baby and picking them up. And sometimes they can't because the baby is so um, fragile and sick that it has to stay in its incubator, and they feel guilty because they wish that they could protect their baby or help them more. And so calmer really plays a role in that, where as a mother said, it's an extension of of um, of her or of them. And also as a nurse, um, there's a lot of technology already in the nursery, lots of machines, lots of things that make noise, um, and knowing that calmer is just really something that is integrated into the the incubator. You can't even see it basically unless it's on, and you could see the baby moving a little bit, but it's really not something that is adding any burden to the care that they provide. And on top of it, nurses also feel guilty when they can't provide pain management. Um, and sometimes they can't be at the bedside to do this pain management strategy that is the standard care currently in the nursery at the BC Women's Hospital. So it's a touch base intervention where nurses have to be present and have to touch the baby, tuck them during a painful procedure. But sometimes they can't be there when the lab technician is there to take the blood, and so because they're busy doing something else, and so that with that they can also feel guilty. But knowing that the calmer is there and that they can just start it up, and that it will be as effective as their human touch based intervention that they do normally, is also kind of a backup of the nurse in a way. So it's not just a backup of the mother, but also a backup of the nurse.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important that it not only fills a gap, but it improves the neonatal care. So I think this project is just so important. And overall, I would say that the Calmer project is a great example of engaging end users, obtaining their feedback, working with various stakeholders in a collaborative way with all these engineers, these undergraduates from Cornell, like all over the place, as well as disseminating your findings so broadly through press releases, Twitter at the BC Tech Conference, all these different ways to engage both broadly as well as the specific groups that you are targeting. So I think overall it just hits all these different pillars of great KT and knowledge translation and just very user focused intervention. So this was really great spending the last little bit talking about the Calmer project and both of your roles. Are there any last comments or anything you would like to share with our listeners of how they can stay connected with Calmer updates or maybe get in touch with either of you?
I'm on Twitter, L Holsti at whatever it is. Sorry, I'm not. I'm not super wise on Twitter. I think Manon is also on Twitter, but you can email me at lisa.holsti@ubc.ca to find out, to connect with me if you have any questions or ideas around CALMER. Would be happy to engage.
And myself also, as Lisa mentioned, I have a Twitter handle, although I'm not very active, but I should be more. It's at Dr. Dr. Manon Ranger. And also, I have an email at UBC, um, manon.ranger@ubc.ca, and I welcome also graduate students that would like to work with us on the next phases of CALMER. Lots of questions still need to be answered, and so I have cross memberships in pediatrics and also in the neuroscience graduate program, and also in the reproductive and developmental sciences, all part of the Faculty of Medicine.
Fantastic. So you heard it here, folks. Whether you're looking for an industry partner or a graduate opportunity, we'll list both of their emails and Twitter handles below. And that wraps it up for this episode.
That's it for today, right from the heart of Vancouver. Thanks to UBC AMS for supporting this podcast.
Keep in touch in the meanwhile on Twitter at RAINCOAT Podcast. Till next time.
Stay dry and stay safe.